Welcome dear learners. We are going to deal with the topic of symbolism and phenomenology in detail in order to understand the concept of phenomenology and symbolism. In this lecture, we are going to discuss about two areas, namely symbolism and phenomenology. Now, let us discuss about the general outline for symbolism, meanings, fundamental aspects of social experience and identities, critics of symbolic interaction perspective, characteristics. Now, we will introduce the symbolism. The symbolic interaction perspective, also called symbolic interactionism, is a major framework of the sociological theory. This perspective relies on the symbolic meaning that people develop and build upon in the process of social interaction. Although symbolic interactionism traces its origin to Max Weber's assertion that individuals act according to their world, the American philosopher George Herbert Mead introduced this perspective to American sociology in the 1920s. The subjective meanings. Symbolic interaction theory analyzes society by addressing the subjective meanings that people impose on objects, events, and behaviors. Subjective meanings are given primacy because it is believed that people behave based on what they believe and not just on what is objectively true. Thus, society is thought to be socially constructed through human interpretation. People interpret one another's behavior, and it is these interpretations that form the social bond. These interpretations are called the definition of the situation. For example, why would young people smoke cigarettes even when all objective medical evidences point to the dangers of doing so? The answer is in the definition of the situation that people create. Studies find that teenagers are well informed about the risks of tobacco, but they also think that smoking is cool, that they will be safe from harm, and that smoking projects a positive image to their peers. So, the symbolic meaning of smoking overrides the facts regarding smoking and risk. Fundamental aspects of social experience and identities. Some fundamental aspects of our social experience and identities like race and gender can be understood through the symbolic interactionist lens. Having no biological basis at all, both race and gender are social constructs that function based on what we believe to be true about people given what they look like. We use socially constructed meanings of race and gender to help us decide who to interact with, how to do so, and to help us determine, sometimes inaccurately, the meaning of a person's words or actions. One shocking example of how this theoretical concept plays out within the social construct of race is manifested in the fact that many people, regardless of race, believe that lighter skinned blacks and Latinos are smarter than their darker skinned counterparts. This phenomenon, called colorism, occurs because of the racist stereotype that has been encoded in skin color over centuries. Concerning gender, we see the problematic way in which meaning is attached to the symbols man and woman in the sexist trend of college students routinely rating male professors more highly than female ones, or in pay inequality based on gender. Critics of symbolic interaction perspective. Critics of this theory claim that symbolic interactionism neglects the macro level of social interpretation. In other words, symbolic interactionists may miss the more significant issues of society by focusing too closely on the trees rather than the forest. The perspective also receives criticism for slightening the influence of social forces and institutions on individual interactions. In the case of smoking, a symbolic interactionist perspective might miss the powerful role that the institution of mass media plays in shaping perceptions of smoking through advertising and by portraying smoking in film and television. In the cases of race and gender, this perspective would not account for social forces like systematic racism or gender discrimination, which strongly influence what we believe race and gender mean. According to Blumer, the characteristics of this approach are human interaction, interpretation or definition rather than mere reaction, response based on meaning, use of symbols, and interpretation between stimulus and response. Blumer proposed an interpretive model for sociology which inserts a middle term into the stimulus response couplet so that it becomes stimulus interpretation response. Holton and Cohen note that Blumer made this theory more individualistic and less concerned with larger social process than did Mead. Blumer notes 4 characteristics of the symbolic interaction perspective. Some of these were illustrated in the reading from Simmel, and the symbolic interaction perspective derived at least partly from Simmel. Blumer notes in the way as the characteristics, the first one, symbols. While the social world is composed of material and objective features, what distinguishes humans is their extensive and creative use of communication through symbols. The history, culture, and forms of communication of humans can be traced through symbols, and it is through symbols that meaning is associated with interpretation, action, and interaction. At one level, symbols may seem fixed, but the symbolic interaction perspective emphasizes the shifting, flexible, and creative manner in which humans use symbols. The process of adjustment and change involve individual interactions and larger scale features such as norms and order. Blumer notes how habit, routine, and shared meanings occur, but how these are always open to reappraisal and further adjustment. The symbolic interactionist studies and analyzes the process involved in all aspects of the use of symbols and communication, change, adjustment, becoming. The symbolic interactions perspective considers people as active agents, but quite different from the rational, self-centered, autonomous individual of 19th century liberalism. People are actors or agents, and the social world is an active one with constant adjustment and organization as essential features of social interaction. The self is created through such interactions, but it is not necessarily a fixed and inflexible self, but one that is constantly adjusting to others. The concern is with how the self develops, how individual lives develop a biography, how social order is constantly being created, and how larger social forces emerge from these. For the symbolic interactionist, the world is an active one and society is this active social world. Interaction, Blumer notes that this perspective is not just concerned with the individual or with society, but with the joint acts through which lives are organized and societies assembled. Actions are not individual actions as in rational choice models, nor with personal meaning in the Berian sense, nor with the unit act of Parsons. Rather, actions are always joined with a mutual response and adjustment of the actor and others considered. The self, if one which emerges not just from the individual, but with how others see the person and how the person responds to and develops his or her own responses to this. Empirical, perhaps one of the main reasons that symbolic interactions has remained an important theoretical influence during most of the 20th century is its attention to what actually occurs as humans interact. While the symbolic interaction perspective may seem to lack well developed concepts, logical models, or theoretical rigor, it makes up for this by studying social interactions of actual people in the social world. Given that it concerns human interaction, which is something that any student of sociology is part of, the raw materials for the study of these interactions are available to anyone. At the same time, the study requires careful observation, an ability to pay attention to detail, and a consideration of the accepted and routine. While it may be difficult to abstract from the perspective of each sociologist, empirical study must move beyond the prejudice and bias of the observer. Now we will discuss about a general outline for phenomenology, concept, definition, methods, and further developments. Phenomenology, definition, and basic concepts. The pedagogy of phenomenology is rather a complex topic to understand, especially when one is not acquainted with the subject. Before we delve into the concept of phenomenology, let us first understand the term etymologically. Phenomenology comes from two terms, phenomena meaning things as they appear and logy meaning science or study. Putting the meanings together, we get the study of things as they appear. Phenomenology is not a subject that has been founded, but a subject that grew. This subject grew significantly in the 20th century, and the founder of is Edmund Husserl. The recent definitions of phenomenology are the study of human experience and of the way things present themselves to us in and through such experience as given by Sokolowski. The study of the structures of consciousness as experienced from the first person point of view according to Smith. Though these recent definitions give us a glimpse of what phenomenology is, to understand it better we need to understand what Husserl meant. Husserl focused on consciousness and thought of phenomenology as a kind of descriptive enterprise that specifies the structures that characterize consciousness and the world as we experience. To put it in simple terms, it means a way of seeing things rather than a set of doctrines. It is a method that attempted to give description of the way things appear in our conscious experience. It is said that the way things appear in our consciousness is actually very different from how it is in reality. Phenomenologists try to understand the perception in terms of the meaning it has for the subjects. To understand phenomenology better, let us look into the goal and method of phenomenology. Goal and method of studying phenomenology. Phenomenology is a philosophy that works from below and not from above. Phenomenology is built upon consciousness. To the things themselves means that the things that are observed by the subject as an act of consciousness, and these things are what Husserl calls the phenomena. The goal of phenomenology is to discover the essential structures of the acts and the objective entities that correspond to them. The basic method of studying the subject of phenomenology is through the process reduction. It is believed that in this process the existence of the world must be out in brackets. This is because the existing world is not the theme of phenomenology. The theme of phenomenology is the manner in which knowledge of the world comes. There are three reductions that come in a systematic order, which is as follows: everything is reduced to phenomena. This is known by consciousness such as intuition, recollection, imagination, and judgment. Intuition means an activity in which a person grasps something immediately. Let us try to understand these reductions with the help of an example. Suppose if we are staring out of the window onto the car parked on the street, since everything is reduced to a phenomenon, that is, things as they appear, we can realize that the object is a car. Eidic reduction. According to this reduction, one must forego everything that is factual. It is a means of grasping essence. On forms multiplicity of variations of a given object, but one focuses attention on what remains the same throughout all the variations. This object that remains constant is called the invariant by Husserl. For the example, while staring at the car out of the window, we either have our conscience asking to clean the car or ride it or open the trunk and collect the needful. There are multiple variations of the objects, but invariant is the car. We forego the factual object, car, and ponder over the multiple tasks that are a possibility. Transcendental reduction, that fundamental event that is occurring in our consciousness, is the creation that is happening either through the acts of past or the acts of future. For example, we think of cleaning the car because we drove it in the rain and all the mud got on the car. We want to ride it because we need to go to work for, want to open the trunk and collect stuff because we might have just come from grocery shopping. The three reduction help understand the phenomenological method of understanding consciousness, which is unlike the introspective psychology. Now we will move to the basic concepts of phenomenology. Phenomenologists must examine the different forms of intentionality in a reflective attitude. This is to be done because it is through the intentionality that each domain of objects becomes accessible. In order to be able to investigate, it is necessary to discover the founding act by which realities are constituted. It is said that there is a meaning for consciousness which is made possible only through transcendental reduction. The idea is to question the last source of achievement. Phenomenology is not outside the arena of science, but it helps present the unquestioned presuppositions of the sciences. Husserl, in his last book, reaches the life world. According to him, it is the world as shaped within the immediate experience of each individual. By questioning back the foundations that science presupposes further developments, with time, phenomenology developed diversely, taking different paths from what Husserl has begun. Phenomenology has diverged into many topics that have been studied in the later stages by many scholars. To name a few: phenomenological, psychology and pure logical, aesthetics, philosophy of law. Some tried to develop it on the lines of realism and Heidegger's hermeneutic phenomenology. Over time, phenomenology left the boundaries of Germany and spread from France to United States to the world over. Scholars from all the regions have studied phenomenology, interpreted and tried to expand it. It has also extended its branches into other disciplines like mathematics, biological sciences, psychology, like sociology, study of religion, history, and most recently cognitive sciences too. Phenomenology has indeed come a long way and grew to be one of the greatly admired topics amongst the scholars. Phenomenology of religion. Phenomenology of religion, methodological approach to the study of religion that emphasizes the standpoint of the believer, drawing insights from the philosophical traditions of phenomenology especially as exemplified by Edmund Husserl. It seeks to uncover religion's essence through investigations that are free from distorting influences of scholarly or traditional values and prejudices. Phenomenology of religion is distinct from historical, sociological, anthropological, philosophical, and theological approaches to the study of religion. Unlike them, it treats religion as a phenomenon that cannot be explained in terms of any particular aspects of human society, culture, or thought. Example, as the product of history, as a creation of intellectual elites, or as a set of truth claims about reality or the ends of human life, though it interacts with all of these aspects. To end this, phenomenology of religion draws insights from Husserl's notions of epoch, the bracketing or suspension of judgment, as Gerardus van der Lino wrote in his classic text. Actually, in English, let me read: Religion in Essence and Manifestation, a study in phenomenology. Phenomenologists of religion seek to suspend their beliefs about religions in order to describe them in their own terms from a standpoint that is empathetic with their respective adherents. Phenomenology of religion is also comparative, seeking out aspects of religious life that are its proponents suggest universal or essential rather than applicable only to particular traditions. Most approaches since the discipline's founding have located the essence of religion in the human experience of a purportedly universal and transcendent, though indeterminate, that aspect of reality. Recalling the French sociologist Émile Durkheim's classification of religious phenomena into the sacred and the profane, most phenomenologists of religion call this aspect the sacred, and those who do not will at least refer to it in terms that evoke the sense of an encounter with a sublime superhuman other. In his book Das Heilige, The Idea of the Holy, the German theologian Rudolf Otto wrote that all religions arise from the experience of the numinous, which he categorized as the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, the transcendent mystery that humans find both terrifying and compelling. This mystery, which Otto called the holy rather than the sacred, is so profound. Otto wrote of a clear overplus of meaning that it compels not only respect but also reverence, which is the wellspring of religious thought, behavior, and culture. Mircea Eliade, a Romanian-born scholar who fostered the study of history of religions at the University of Chicago, constructed another influential notion of the sacred. In The Sacred and the Profane, in 1959, he identified it with the transcendent reality that breaks through in some tangible form within mundane existence. Such a manifestation of the sacred, a phenomenon that Eliade called a hierophany, subsequently becomes an object of devotion in a religious tradition. In The Sacred and the Profane and subsequent works, he demonstrated how hierophanies have influenced the ways in which religious traditions distinguish between sacred and profane spaces and interpret and measure the flow of time. Both Otto and Eliade viewed the sacred as something not only existential and experiential but also static and transhistorical, unaffected by historical change. The 20th century British scholar of religion, Ninian Smart, developed a phenomenological model that featured a more dynamic vision of the sacred that could explain the diversity among religions, much of which it attributed to historical and cultural differences. Smart proposed that the sacred manifests itself in human life in 7 dimensions: the doctrinal or philosophical, the mythical, the ethical, the experiential, the ritual, social, and the material. In Smart's conception, each religious tradition, to a greater or lesser degree, has a system of core beliefs, a narrative that explains and justifies them, a moral code that it expects its followers to live by, an emotional investment that it wants them to make, a set of practices that help them to do so, and both an institutional structure and a material culture that create the arena within which they live their faith. However, it may be conceived by adherents of a particular religion. The sacred is present in, mediated by, and expressed through these 7 dimensions according to Smart. The most prevalent and substantial criticism of phenomenology of religion concerns its attempt to seek out and present universal or essential aspects of religious life. Critics charge that in following Otto's and Eliot's lead and positing the sacred as religion's essence, phenomenologists unduly favor a Western and especially Christian concept of religion. The holy or the sacred may fit certain aspects of Christianity, Judaism, or even Islam, but may be inappropriate to the study of some forms of Buddhism or of some aspects of Chinese folk religions. Smart's dimensions, however, constitute a response to this objection. They provide a seemingly multicultural and cross-cultural traditional approach that nevertheless conceives of religion as having a discernible essence. Dear learners, so far we have discussed the topic of symbolism and phenomenology with some key points such as meanings, fundamental aspects of social experience and identities, critics of symbolic interaction, perspective, characteristics and phenomenology concept like definition, including the methods and further developments. I hope you might have enjoyed this session with much more information on symbolism and phenomenology. Thank you and all the best.